Hey friends, it's Jimmy here, welcoming you to part 250 of this Unsolved Mysteries series. If you appreciate what I do, don't forget to hit the like and subscribe buttons, tap the notification bell, and drop a quick comment below. Picture the idyllic silence of an August evening in 1982, deep within the scenic Gambrels State Park in Frederick, Maryland. This park is nestled within the Catoctin Mountains, a rugged, isolated expanse known for its natural beauty, and, less appealingly, as a conveniently remote area for body disposal. On this particular evening, a couple out mushroom hunting stumbled upon something chilling: a heavy, antiquated steamer trunk sitting just a few feet off a secluded gravel roadway. Curiosity, perhaps mixed with dread, compelled them to pry it open with a rock, as was the style at the time. The mushroom foraging couple got the shock of their lives when they found the decomposed, skeletal remains of a woman inside. This woman would eventually be given an unusual nickname that has made her stick out amongst doe cases. She was dubbed the cheerleader in the trunk. But before we get into the theory that led to that name, I've got to discuss the foundational details of the case. The body had been carefully placed within the trunk, a cumbersome piece of luggage that would have required considerable effort and planning to obtain, load, and transport. Yet, despite this premeditation, the final act of disposal seemed hasty. The trunk was only lightly covered with scattered leaves and sticks, and remained clearly visible just off the road. This is despite the fact that this is an area where the perpetrator could have tossed the trunk somewhere where it likely never would have been found. This suggests that whoever was dropping off this trunk may have thought he had been spotted and had to discard it very quickly. The very choice of Gambrels State Park for this disposal wasn't accidental. Areas like the Frederick watershed are known to locals as places where remains are occasionally dumped, minimizing the travel distance required to hide the body. This strongly indicates the killer possessed local knowledge of the area and was highly likely residing or working within the immediate area. The remains were taken to the morgue in Baltimore for forensic analysis. The victim was identified as a petite white female, believed to be in her late teens or early 20s, though initial forensic estimates had a wider range of 17 to 45 years. She stood approximately 5 feet 3 inches to 5 feet 5 inches tall and was estimated to weigh between 100 and 130 pounds. Her hair was described as medium length, wavy, and dark brown, though analysis of her body hair suggested her natural color might have been reddish brown. Strikingly, no clothing or jewelry was found with the remains, stripping investigators of the conventional markers that often lead to quick identification. The only item recovered within the footlocker was a dark-colored towel. The lack of any personal effects implies that the killer meticulously controlled the crime scene, removing anything that could readily link the victim to her life or their location. Establishing the time of death became an immediate and overwhelming investigative roadblock, and seriously, this is one of the least precise estimates I've ever seen. Although initial forensic investigation determined that death likely occurred in early spring 1982, the cops brought on a forensic anthropologist for further analysis. What he said would upend this entire timeline. First, he affirmed that it was possible that she had died in 1982, a few months prior. However, based on the evidence, he couldn't exclude the possibility that she died up to 10 years earlier, as far back as 1972. This massive temporal ambiguity crippled the investigation's early efforts, making it virtually impossible to link her to a manageable list of missing persons. After all, it wasn't possible to just do a quick computer search of databases back in the day. Notably, a definitive cause of death remained somewhat elusive due to the advanced skeletal state. However, key forensic evidence pointed towards a deeply personal and aggressive attack. Fractures on the bones indicated potential forceful strangulation, requiring prolonged close contact aggression. Personally, I think this is good enough evidence to say that she most likely died from strangulation, though of course given the state of her remains, they can't say this beyond any doubt. The most compelling and perhaps paradoxical evidence lies in the Jane Doe's dental and skeletal profiles, and that skeletal profile would give her the cheerleader nickname. Her dental records were extensive, suggesting access to significant health care throughout her life. She had 2 crowns on her left front teeth, a root canal, several silver fillings, and a gold-filled tooth on the upper right side. Investigators initially felt this unique composite of dental procedures, which often leaves a distinct signature, would quickly lead to her identification. Adding a layer of complexity to this unique dental profile, examiners noted that some of the dental procedures were consistent with work performed by dental students. This is an incredibly important detail, because dental schools maintain exhaustive, meticulously detailed patient files that could potentially stretch back decades. This information suggests the victim may have received care at a university clinic, possibly due to a lower cost or as part of a dental residency program. Oddly, a stark contrast existed in her mouth. She had 2 impacted wisdom teeth that had never been removed. These teeth would have been a source of chronic pain. The fact that a woman with 2 expensive front crowns and a gold filling allowed these painful teeth to remain untreated suggests something. Perhaps she had a critical disruption in her life or a financial downturn in the years immediately preceding her death. This shift offers a narrative of likely vulnerability in her final years, which may be why she is yet to be identified. The famous nickname "cheerleader in the trunk" originated not from speculation, but from the forensic evidence inscribed on her bones. An anthropologist examining the skeleton noted distinct markers of a highly active life. The woman exhibited spondylolysis, a defect in the vertebrae, and heavy wear on her pelvis and feet. This unique pattern suggested she regularly engaged in high-impact acrobatic activities, such as dance, gymnastics, or cheerleading. According to some, this indicated she was a disciplined, possibly professional athlete or performer whose physical career may have peaked in her late teens or early 20s. The skeletal profile, therefore, provides a biographical record of her life before her death. If she was in her early to mid-20s, as currently estimated, her intense athletic career had likely ended. Alternatively, some analysts have suggested the heavy wear on her feet could also indicate the frequent use of high-heeled shoes or prolonged periods of hard physical labor. This high-heeled element suggests that she may have been a professional dancer of the more illicit variety. Regardless of the exact interpretation, her skeleton records a history of significant, sustained physical work. Despite being featured numerous times on television shows and podcasts, the case of the cheerleader in the trunk languished, unable to generate the tip needed to restore her name. The killer's motivations remain speculative, but the method of disposal provides strong circumstantial evidence regarding their profile. The offender had to be highly motivated, possessing the means to acquire and transport a large steamer trunk, and demonstrating intimate knowledge of the Frederick watershed area. The single greatest ongoing challenge is technical: the state of her remains. Past attempts to obtain a DNA profile have failed, with forensic labs citing insufficient DNA for sequencing. Without a usable DNA profile, the most powerful modern tool for cold case resolution, investigative genetic genealogy, can't be used yet. Speaking as someone who looks at these old cases all the time, this case is honestly so frustrating. This is a woman with such a detailed, specific history written right there in her teeth. It's a whole roadmap of her life. Despite that fact, no dental records have ever matched up, which seems to me to mean that she's never been reported missing. When a missing person is entered into the national database, All their vitals, including their dentals, are tossed in there. I suppose there's always the chance that her information could have been entered incorrectly, and there's another missing woman out there who just hasn't had her name attached to this case. I suspect that at this point this Jane Doe won't have her name back until forensic advances allow a complete DNA profile to be taken from her bones. When a person disappears, the investigation usually begins with retracing their steps or interviewing close contacts. But what happens when the last step taken is into a fortress-like diplomatic compound where surveillance is omnipresent and entry is highly controlled? On a routine summer day, Peter Dimitrov walked into the U.S. Embassy in Sofia for a standard visa interview and performed an impossible disappearing act. He never left the building. Peter vanished inside American territory, creating a decade-long vacuum of official information that has haunted his family. Or at least, that's been the commonly accepted narrative thus far. And as you'll see, I think the foundational assumption about this weird unsolved mystery is likely incorrect. The known facts of Peter's disappearance center on a mundane appointment scheduled for June 12, 2010. Peter Dimitrov, a 23-year-old from the town of Popovo, arrived at the sprawling United States Embassy complex in Bulgaria's capital, Sofia. Also, just as a quick aside, I think that's probably the best name possible for a capital. Sofia, Bulgaria. I love the ring of it. Kind of sounds like the name of a person when you say it together. He was accompanied by two friends who waited for him outside, confirming that they saw him enter the diplomatic premises. That entrance marks the last documented, confirmed sighting of Peter. The circumstances surrounding this vanishing are fundamentally constrained by the high-security environment of the U.S. diplomatic mission. Diplomatic compounds, particularly those in strategic NATO partner nations like Bulgaria, operate under strict protocols designed to prevent precisely this kind of unauthorized movement. When an applicant approaches the consular section for an interview, they are forced to lose contact with the outside world. Strict security policies mandate that applicants can't bring laptops, tablets, large bags, or sealed packages. Mobile phones are of course screened and held by security personnel for the duration of the meeting. Crucially, the regulations confirm that no one, not friends, spouses, nor attorneys, is allowed to accompany the applicant into the consular waiting room. This ensures the interviewee is isolated and thoroughly screened before meeting with a consular officer. This hyper-controlled environment dictates the starting point for the investigation. It's virtually unthinkable that a routine civilian could slip past multiple layers of security, bypass the consular section, and leave the highly monitored diplomatic grounds unnoticed. The moment Peter passed the initial security checkpoint, his fate became governed by the laws and diplomatic privileges of the United States. This jurisdictional shield fundamentally limits the ability of Bulgarian authorities to conduct a proper search or investigation on premises. In what would become a tragic indictment of the official response, Bulgarian authorities largely abandoned the search soon after the incident. This investigative inertia, particularly concerning a high-profile case linked directly to a crucial geopolitical ally, suggested to some a measure of political deference. According to the usual narrative of this case, as a NATO partner, the Bulgarian state is highly sensitive to diplomatic pressure from Washington. Attempting to aggressively investigate an incident that may have occurred on American soil would pose significant political challenges. Facing this investigative void, Peter's father, Vladimir, was forced to become his own detective, initiating a years-long, exhausting campaign for answers. Despite this, he was unable to get any official word out of either Bulgarian police or American embassy staff. In a testament to his desperate struggle, he reportedly sent a personal letter to President Obama. pleading for intervention in the case of his vanished son. The official search for Peter was ultimately terminated following a controversial discovery far from Sofia. A body, described as disfigured, was found hanging from a tree in the distant Haskovo region. Bulgarian police quickly and firmly stated that the remains belonged to Peter, announcing the finding as the probable end of the mystery. This swift closure, however, was met with staunch disbelief by Peter's parents, who publicly stated their opinion that the body was not their son. Disturbingly, the Bulgarian police never released the results of a DNA test to the family, and even if it was confirmed to be him, this doesn't explain the bizarre circumstances by any means. Because Peter's disappearance occurred under conditions of total security control, the usual theories about his vanishing just don't hold water according to the usual narrative. And just wait for it, because I think there's a really simple way to explain this vanishing. Any plausible explanation must account for his successful exit from the embassy without being documented by either US or Bulgarian perimeter security. The persistent official silence from the American government regarding the disappearance has been viewed as highly suspicious by many online. However, having dug into it further, it looks as though embassies really don't comment on this sort of thing as a matter of course. Anyway, let's get into the theories, because they're weird, and then I'll finally explain what I actually think happened here. One theory suggests an internal incident and subsequent concealment by someone at the embassy. Peter may have suffered an unexpected medical event, or died during a high-stakes violent exchange inside the compound. Under this theory, someone in the embassy may have taken his body to be dumped. While it might be interesting to speculate about, there's just absolutely no evidence whatsoever to support this theory. A second theory centers on internal extraction or recruitment. Under this theory, Peter was identified as a potential valuable intelligence asset and recruited by a three-letter agency like the CIA. According to believers in this theory, this explains how he appears to have simply vanished from the consulate, but in my view, this theory collapses under very basic scrutiny. If an intelligence agency had secretly extracted or recruited Peter, the last thing they'd want is a media firestorm, yet that's exactly what his disappearance created. Intelligence agencies avoid messy public incidents because they draw attention, complicate operations, and risk diplomatic blowback. A covert recruitment wouldn't involve someone vanishing from a consulate in broad daylight, triggering headlines, political pressure, and international speculation. If this scenario were true, the situation would have been quietly managed, not turned into a public mystery. The chaos surrounding his disappearance points away from intelligence involvement, not toward it. My own take on this mystery is that we need to challenge our basic assumptions about this case. The central assumption driving the mystery is that Peter even entered the embassy that morning. Yet this quote-unquote fact rests entirely on the testimony of his two friends, who were the only individuals claiming to have watched him walk inside. Crucially, the embassy never publicly confirmed that Peter arrived or passed through security, and no Bulgarian investigators ever produced independent verification. While the lack of public confirmation from the embassy isn't unusual, I find it odd that Bulgarian investigators weren't able to independently verify it. So I think it didn't happen. Once you strip away the assumption that he entered the compound, a different picture emerges. The two friends' role becomes significantly more important, because their claim, "We saw him go in," is the single thread holding the entire embassy vanishing scenario together. If that thread snaps, the mystery shifts from a geopolitical puzzle to a far more familiar dynamic. The last people to see a missing man alive, providing the only version of events. When I reevaluate this case without assuming the embassy entry, the theories involving intelligence agencies, medical emergencies, or cover-ups become unnecessary leaps. The most straightforward explanation appears to be the answer. The only real conspiracy, if one exists, may lie with the two friends who controlled the narrative from the beginning. Until independent evidence proves Peter stepped into the consulate, the simplest answer is that he never did, and that the mystery starts outside the gate, not inside it. Hey everyone, just want to say thank you for all the support from every viewer, YouTube member, and patron. You guys make this all possible, and I appreciate you all so much. Now let's get back to business. And considering it's Thanksgiving tomorrow, I'm finally dropping a little segment I've been sitting on for a while. Okay, so I do love a good urban legend, and this is one of my favorite ones because it's just so widely believed and repeated. I haven't been including many urban legends in this series recently, but let me know in the comments if you like this sort of stuff included. According to legend, there's a phenomenon so powerful that it simultaneously sedates an entire nation. It's late afternoon on the fourth Thursday of November. Across millions of households, the clamor of family gatherings has quieted to a low rumble of televised football and the rhythmic breathing of your Uncle Mike. Belts are loosened, eyes are heavy, and the collective consciousness of the country drifts into a hazy stupor. For decades, many pointed an accusing finger at the centerpiece of the table, the turkey. But is this bird truly a natural sedative, or have we been scapegoating an innocent fowl for our own gluttonous choices? The legend of the turkey coma is built on a foundation of scientific truth that has been warped by pop culture. The primary suspect in this culinary crime is tryptophan, an essential amino acid. The logic seems sound on the surface. Your body uses tryptophan to produce serotonin, a neurotransmitter that helps regulate mood. Serotonin is then converted into melatonin, the hormone responsible for regulating your sleep-wake cycles. Therefore, the theory goes, eating turkey loads your system with tryptophan, boosts your melatonin, and knocks you out cold. It's a neat little explanation that gives us a scientific-sounding excuse for passing out on the couch before the dishes are done. However, like many urban myths, this explanation crumbles when you look at the actual biochemistry involved. If turkey were truly a potent sleeping pill, we'd see evidence of its power year-round. Consider that a standard turkey sandwich consumed at a desk on a Tuesday in March rarely results in an immediate nap. The numbers simply don't support the myth. According to nutrition data from sources like the USDA, turkey contains roughly the same amount of tryptophan as chicken or beef. More damning to the theory is the fact that many other common foods pack a significantly higher tryptophan punch. Cheddar cheese, soybeans, and even pumpkin seeds contain more of this amino acid per ounce than your beloved November bird. If tryptophan were the sole driver of drowsiness, a grilled cheese sandwich or a handful of nuts would be far more sedating than a slice of turkey breast measure for measure. So, if the turkey isn't guilty, this naturally poses the question of who or what is. The answer lies in the side dishes. The mashed potatoes, stuffing, cranberry sauce, and pies are the true agents of your lethargy. We're dealing with a caloric event that often exceeds 3,000 calories in a single sitting. When you consume such a massive volume of food, your body must divert resources to handle it. The parasympathetic nervous system, often called the rest and digest system, kicks into high gear. Blood flow is directed away from the brain and toward the gastrointestinal tract to aid digestion, naturally leaving you feeling less alert. Combine this with the depressive effects of wine or beer, the tiredness from travel, and perhaps the exhaustion of cooking, and you have a perfect physiological recipe for a nap. Ultimately, blaming the turkey is a convenient way to avoid facing the reality of our holiday excess. The bird is a passenger on a vehicle driven by massive amounts of calories and huge portion sizes. In the end, the idea that the tryptophan in turkey is what causes you to fall asleep is just an urban myth that keeps growing in the telling. Millions of Japanese citizens were watching their television sets on October 12, 1960, expecting a standard political skirmish. Instead, they became involuntary witnesses to an act of breathtaking violence. Inajiro Asanuma, the robust chairman of the Japan Socialist Party, stood at the podium in Tokyo's Hibiya Hall when the sterile formality of the televised debate was shattered. An assassin dashed onto the stage with a wakizashi, a shorter variant of the more commonly known katana, and cut Asanuma down live in front of the entire nation. Immediately after, the question of whether the assassin was a lone wolf or acting on orders of a shadowy group would rear its head. Before his sudden demise, Asanuma was by far the most polarizing figure in Japanese opposition politics. Known for his powerful oratory and commanding presence, he represented the apex of left-wing power, serving as the chairman of the Socialist Party. The political climate of 1960 was defined by the massive, often turbulent opposition to the revision of the U.S.-Japan Security Treaty. This was a period collectively known as the Anpo protests. Under Asanuma's leadership, the Socialists had steered these protests so effectively that they successfully forced the resignation of powerful Prime Minister Nobusuke Kishi. This political victory made Asanuma a hero to the left, but simultaneously magnified the rage of the ultra-nationalist and far-right factions. These factions vehemently supported the American alliance and the treaty as essential for national security. These right-wing elements viewed the Socialists' anti-treaty stance as fundamentally undermining the nation's core interests and sovereignty. The political tension was already at a breaking point, creating a volatile environment where symbolic actions were perceived as outright treason. Asanuma had deliberately inflamed this situation by choosing an aggressively provocative form of diplomacy. In 1959, he met with Chairman Mao and took a bunch of very friendly pictures with him. If you're one of those people who just listen, I've got a picture of the two men up on screen right now. While this picture itself might not look like much, this photograph, which was widely reprinted at the time, would be one of the most important pictures in post-war Japanese history. At the time, Japan, closely allied with the United States, recognized the Republic of China on Taiwan as the legitimate Chinese government. To directly meet with Communist China's leader was, for many on the right, proof that he was planning to abandon the Americans and embrace Red China. The assassination took place during a crucial joint political debate held at Hibiya Public Hall in Tokyo, intended to kick off the general campaigning for the upcoming elections. Rhetoric ran extremely high, with the election being viewed as a fight for the soul of Japan. The stage was crowded with high-profile figures from across the political spectrum. The purpose was to showcase the power of democratic discourse, but the atmosphere was already charged with hostility, reflecting the polarization gripping the country. And I think it's important for me to mention here that Japan was only about a decade into their democratic experiment at this point. Asanuma began his address just after 3 in the afternoon, using his deep, resonant voice to denounce the controversial security pact with the United States. Even as he spoke, members of the far right present in the crowd began shouting insults like, "Shut up, communist," and showering the stage with leaflets. Asanuma, accustomed to such confrontations, initially ignored the heckling and continued his remarks. Suddenly, a young man, only 17 years old, erupted onto the stage. He wore the standard high-collared black student uniform and boots. Things were about to get real. This kid wasn't coming to hurl insults or call Asanuma a Mao sympathizer like most of the others who had come to denounce him. Clutched in his hands, Held in a two-handed samurai-style grip was a wakizashi, a traditional short sword, its bayonet-like blade measuring about a foot in length. The choice of this archaic weapon was deeply symbolic. It was a powerful rejection of modern political methods and democracy. The assassin intended his act not merely as an assassination, but as a divine punishment, delivered by a patriotic warrior against democracy as an institution. The attack was captured live by the cameras broadcasting the event, which documented every terrifying moment. Also, if you've never seen this image before, this is another time you're going to want to look at the screen if you just listen rather than watch. I've had to slightly crop the image, so if you want to see the full thing, Google's your friend. The assailant, Otoya Yamaguchi, lunged into Asanama's large frame, driving the blade deep into his lower abdomen and liver in a powerful collision. There was so much force behind this blow that it sent the politician's notes flying and knocked the glasses straight off his face. As Asanuma stumbled, his face contorted in agony, Yamaguchi recovered his grip and delivered a decisive second thrust into the politician's chest. Colleagues rushed forward to subdue the youth, but the gravely wounded socialist leader wobbled and then collapsed. He was immediately rushed to a hospital but tragically succumbed to his injuries on the operating table. The sheer violence of the event, broadcast live to millions, was instantly immortalized by the photograph captured by Yasushi Nagao. And in case there was any doubt, this is the image I have cropped and put up on the screen for you. The perpetrator, Otoya Yamaguchi, was a figure steeped in the volatile ultranationalism of the era, despite his youth. Influenced initially by his older brother, he began attending speeches and participating in the increasingly frequent right-wing counter-protests. By age 16, his commitment was formalized when he joined the Greater Japan Patriotic Party, led by the right-wing ultranationalist Bin Akao. Akao had a profound impact on the youth with his warnings about impending communist revolution and promoted imagery of the People's Liberation Army in Tokyo. Yamaguchi was highly militant. Throughout the height of the Anpo crisis, he was arrested and released 10 times for his involvement in various counter-protests. This pattern of repeat engagement suggests a deeply rooted and rapidly intensifying ideological commitment. His stated motives for the attack were clear and uncompromising: a deep-seated opposition and resentment toward Asanuma's diplomatic overtures to Communist China. He also professed a strong desire to keep the status quo in relations with America, which again was seen as preventing the influence of the Soviets and Red China. Yamaguchi was convinced that his act was necessary to deter the spread of left-wing movements in Japan. Crucially, Yamaguchi strongly claimed he had grown increasingly disillusioned with Akao's leadership. He felt that the party focused too much on generating media attention rather than achieving meaningful, decisive action. This belief led him to a significant, calculated step. He formally resigned from the Greater Japan Patriotic Party just prior to the attack. In his later testimony to the police, the youth stated explicitly that he needed to be free of the party structure to take action. He then specifically said that Bin Akao would have specifically prevented him from carrying out the crime had he been aware of his plans. The assassination immediately triggered massive public suspicion regarding a wider political plot. For the Japan Socialist Party, the idea that a 17-year-old, acting completely unassisted, could organize and pull off the attack was unthinkable. The socialists quickly moved to control the narrative, framing it as an attack orchestrated by powerful, insidious forces aimed at destroying democracy. And this was a quote too good to pass up on, so here it is. One socialist leader condemned Yamaguchi as, quote, merely a cat's paw of monopolistic capitalistic forces. The socialists themselves would come to blame the ruling Liberal Democratic Party rather than the far right, based on an analysis of who benefited most. The circumstances certainly fueled these suspicions. The public correctly perceived a massive institutional security failure. The assassin was, after all, a known far-right activist. Yet despite this, he was able to successfully infiltrate a stage containing all of the nation's top political figures. Following the attack, demonstrators marched on police headquarters, demanding the resignation of the police chief and accusing him of providing inadequate security. Most protesters expressed the belief that the cops deliberately allowed him to step onto the stage. The subsequent battles between demonstrators and police only compounded the impression of a state that had either deliberately stood down or was incompetent in protecting the opposition. The political calculus of the era provided further circumstantial grounding for the conspiracy theory. The assassination occurred at the peak of the socialist influence in Japan, immediately following their success in forcing a prime minister's resignation over the security treaty. Removing Asanuma, who provided charismatic leadership, accelerated the internal fragmentation of the party and drastically damaged its ability to present a cohesive message. The Socialist Party's view that the ruling Liberal Democratic Party could have been in on the attack was, for a time, very popular. While this conspiracy theory has died on the vine over the years, for lack of any evidence whatsoever, a more interesting and realistic theory has taken hold. Historically, far-right ultranationalist groups in Japan were often loosely connected with powerful conservative figures and corporate interests. In the period of rebuilding after 1945, they frequently served as tools for political intimidation against labor unions, or the left in general. Yamaguchi's deliberate decision to separate from his allegiances just prior to the attack may itself serve as evidence of coordinated involvement by far-right forces. Rather than undermining the conspiracy theory, his documented break with the organization could be interpreted as a calculated move to obscure direct connections. Yamaguchi's resignation may have been designed to create the appearance of an independent actor, free from organizational control. This apparent quest for ideological purity and autonomy can be seen as a sophisticated tactic to deflect suspicion and protect the interests of those who might have influenced his actions. Many have also considered it unusual how a 17-year-old who had just committed an extremist act was so insistent that he had no connections to anyone anymore. They also find it suspicious that he specifically said that the leaders of the ultranationalist party explicitly would have stopped him if he knew. What happened next would only deepen the idea that Yamaguchi wasn't acting alone. Less than 3 weeks after the attack, while confined in a Tokyo juvenile detention facility, Otoya Yamaguchi ensured his own narrative reached its desired dramatic conclusion. The 17-year-old assassin was discovered dead in his cell. He had torn strips from his own bedsheet and knotted them into a rope and had apparently ended himself, despite the fact he was under constant watch. Not to turn everything into American politics or anything, but that sounds really topical right now. Yamaguchi left behind a final, chilling declaration scrawled onto the cell wall. The message reaffirmed his ultimate loyalty. 7 lives for my country. 10,000 years for His Imperial Majesty, the Emperor. By invoking the phrase 7 lives, this references a legendary samurai's pledge of continuous reincarnation to serve the Emperor over and over again. By doing this, Yamaguchi powerfully linked his act to the ideals of patriotic sacrifice and devotion to the imperial throne. In this act of eliminating himself, he avoided a protracted investigation which may have revealed the full extent of his political backing. In the wake of Asanuma's sudden violent death, the Japan Socialist Party struggled desperately to maintain coherence and momentum. The loss of his robust and experienced leadership created a vacuum that proved impossible to fill. His successor quickly attempted to steer the party toward a more centrist platform, in a move that fed into the conspiracy theories swirling about. This rapid doctrinal shift alienated the revolutionary socialist and communist elements within the party, resulting in severe and damaging infighting. The assassination, regardless of whether it was ordered by shadowy figures behind the scenes or not, proved strategically fatal for the opposition. Over the decades that followed, the Socialist Party's influence steadily diminished, a decline that continued relentlessly until the party's ultimate extinction in 1996.